Hello, and welcome to another of our Project Nolan videos, where we are ranking Christopher Nolan's first 10 movies in order of sort of personal favourites and personal preference, and then finally reviewing Tenet. I have to say, even though we've said this in other videos, it's been a long time since we've done one of these. Some months have passed, I think that's due mainly to the fact that we have very young families, including babies in our lives, and full-time teaching careers. So it's frustrating how those sort of things can get in the way of really important stuff like these videos.
Not forgetting the global pandemic, of course.
Yeah, there's that as well. Yeah. So actually, I mean, I describe us as kind of modern day heroes for being able to get this out, this content out there. But the people want it, I'm sure. So we're doing our bit for the film appreciation community. So that's roughly, I mean, I've described what we were doing. We're reviewing these movies. We are now actually we've only got 2 more to do before reviewing Tenet. And so what that means is we are the last 2 films we're reviewing are the films that came in at number 1 for myself and for you in this top 10. This is my number 1. This is my favourite Christopher Nolan movie of his first 10, Inception. It was a film that came out in 2010, right in between The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises. Interestingly, this came in as your number 7 or 8. Is that right?
I think it was number 8.
Number 8. Okay. Yeah. Because the last video we did was Interstellar, which was your number 2, which interestingly had been my number 7. So this is for a lot of this project, we had actually had very, very similar rankings for our videos for the first 5 or 6, and then just these last 2 have been slightly skewed, which makes the project all the more interesting, I guess. So normally at this point, Matt would do his synopsis of the movie, but because this is my favorite, I decided I would do the synopsis for this one. But it freaked me out. Suddenly I realized I've not done the synopsis for any of these movies, so I've written this, and it feels a bit like I'm writing a blurb for the back of the DVD, or maybe even the sort of Daily Mirror's what's on TV review or something like that. So anyway, you have to bear with me. So okay. The film is, I don't know how to describe whether it's science fiction or heist movie. We'll come to that probably later. But here we go. Dominic Cobb and his partners are involved in the world of corporate espionage. A bit like Private Eyes, they steal information for high-paying clients. The twist, they steal from people's dreams in a process known as extraction. Accomplished at this, they're employed by a secretive businessman to achieve something rarely tried before, not to extract a secret, but to plant an idea into someone's head via their dreams. This is known as Inception. Cobb assembles a team of career criminals and wannabe architects to go on a journey of dreams within dreams to carry out this heist, but the stakes are high. If the mission fails, the team run the risk of falling into limbo, a state which is neither asleep nor awake, but feels like centuries to the dreamer. For Cobb, success means the freedom to return home to America, a place where he's been exiled from and separated from his young children after he was accused of a crime which would see him locked up the moment he steps foot on US soil. The heist itself is not completely plain sailing, as Cobb and crew not only have to battle the subconscious of the mark they're trying to plant an idea into, but also Cobb's own subconscious as his traumatic past comes to find him in his dreams. What do you think?
That was very impressive.
Yeah,
very impressive. Very concise. As you said earlier, I was panicking at the thought of having to describe what happens in this film.
Yeah, definitely, and it's so strange. It's a film that I feel like, as you'd expect, being my number 1 in this list, it's a film that I feel like I know incredibly well. In fact, one of the reasons that I think it is number 1 is that I feel quite a sort of I like a personal attachment to it. It's I feel quite an emotive personal attachment to the movie, which I think got to number 1. I alluded earlier on or actually you mentioned it in one of our earlier videos, that during our discussions of these movies, I had revealed to you, because we kept everything very tightly secret from one another when we did this, I had revealed to you that one of the films had taken me by surprise on our re-watchings, and you had thought it had been Inception and that it would be lower down my list. Now, the thing is, you were right. It was Inception. And I didn't, and it almost came a lot lower in the list for me, because I found I didn't like watching it from a purely critical perspective, because I've never watched it like that before. When we rewatched these movies, I was making notes. I've got a funny story about that, but I was making notes as we were going along, and I was watching them from this kind of joining the dots between Nolan's movies and thinking about maybe things like the cinematography and stuff like that. And I'd never watched Inception in that way before, and I didn't like it. It made it feel sort of cold.
Yeah.
And a little, it detached me from it, and like I said, I've got quite an emotive connection to this film, so it nearly did fall lower down the list than it did in some ways. But I can't shake that connection, and I think that's why it ended up being number one, because it's despite the feeling I had watching it. It is a film that I know that I'll carry on watching time and time again. I'll look forward to introducing new people to it, my children and so on. And I think it's a great film. So I'll come to all those things later. But what's your memories of Inception, or when did you see it at the pictures, or?
Yeah. So I remember seeing it in the cinema, and then not seeing it again for quite a while. And then I remember watching it a second time. I was on a family holiday, and my mum and dad and my sister and everyone was there, and we all sat down to watch it. But that was probably 2000, well, a couple of years after the film came out, and then I haven't really watched it until we did these rewatches again. And I always enjoyed Inception, and the idea is great, and you respect Nolan for the idea and pulling this off. But it didn't leave that emotive connection or the emotional connection that I had with his other films like Interstellar or Dark Knight or anything like that. So when I watched it again, I was quite surprised by my response as well, because I thought, it's been a bit of time, we've seen Nolan's work evolve, and I'll go back and watch this and it'll go up my list and I'll like it more. And I found like there's a strange conflict with Inception for me, is that it's the film that if I had to pick a Nolan film just to watch, just to fill a few hours just for pure entertainment, I'd probably pick Inception. But it's also a film that it's felt really shallow to me in like its humanity and like its human characters. And I realized after watching these films and reviewing them again is that the films that Nolan works on and writes as an individual are the films that probably don't do it as much for me. Whereas the films he writes with his brother or a co-write like Interstellar seem to have a much stronger emotional impact for me, at least. So I thought Inception was a very, very entertaining, very well crafted film, but for me it just felt a bit shallow and didn't really. I don't care about the characters when I watch it. Like, I'm not really bothered about if Cobb is successful or not.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because that coldness is actually a kind of criticism leveled at a lot of his early films anyway. And I think he kind of, for me, sort of almost doubled downs on that in Interstellar, kind of in a post Dark Knight Rises way, and in some ways maybe in Dark Knight Rises as well. I think he gives there's a lot at stake for the characters, a lot of jeopardy. And there's that. I don't even know if we discussed this, that in Dark Knight, our loving on the Dark Knight Rises, but that amazing moment where Batman and Catwoman kiss, which is kind of such pure Hollywood, just to get the cheers. But there is a bit more humanity in that. And so I don't disagree with you. I don't think that necessarily the characters are particularly likable or in this film. I think they are a cold bunch, and in fact the film itself can feel very sterile. One of the first comments I made in my notes about the incredible thing in this movie is the mise en scène is beautiful. I mean, it's stunning. From the opening scenes where we're actually hang on a second, I think we're probably going to wander into, despite my amazing synopsis being spoiler free, I think we're going to probably wander into spoilers quite quickly on this.
Better get that out there actually before
I've got me compulsory spoiler alert sign, so don't go any further than this in the video if you are worried about spoilers. So we start the first twist, because this is a film like Nolan's others where there are lots of twists. The first twist is that the opening scenes are actually we're inside a dream, and from the start the worlds and the rooms, the interiors, the exteriors, it's all beautiful. The mise en scène, it's quite sterile. There isn't, we haven't got any of that kind of grubbiness that's in, for example, The Prestige, or some of the kind of the bits of Gotham that feel jaded and falling apart, or the grubbiness of Memento, everything in The Prestige, right down to the kind of absolute sharp suits that everyone looks so cool. That there is a cleanness to this, you know.
I agree, and I think it does look amazing, the film, and it is extremely well designed. But I've always had a bit of an issue with Nolan's design, and I think that this, again, if you separate the films that are pure Nolan ideas that he has got the writing credit on in his body of work or his oeuvre, there is something about those films that stand out to me, and it's reflected in his posters. You know, if you see like the Dark Knight posters or anything like that, they're a bit more like design and thought into them. But Inception and Interstellar, like, they're really terrible posters. And I think, and a lot of the issues I have with Inception are like maximized or, you know, exaggerated, or a lot more evident in Tenet when we talk about that. Is that I do think it looks great, the film, but it just looks so corporate and so clean and clinical that it sort of represents what I feel about the film, really, is that there's so much focus on like the visual and the idea that sort of distracts for the audience away from like the humanity of the characters, or in the writing and design process of the film, they sort of neglect the characters. And I think on reflection, like, I still love Nolan and all that, but maybe some of the criticisms I maybe not agree with more, but I can see them a little bit more clearly now, is that the characters in this film are just a vehicle for the idea. Whereas that, for me at least, whereas I think the idea in like the Prestige and films like that comes secondary to the characters, or at least they're on par or used better. You know what I mean?
I think that's a fair point, and but it's an evolution of that idea, I think, and it's interesting you mentioned Tenet in this, because for me, Tenet is, if anything, a natural successor to this film more than any of the other movies. Tenet is this isn't a sort of a sequel, but what he created with Inception, he takes on with Tenet. And again, not to give too much away about our own feelings of Tenet, I think Inception actually transcends Tenet for some of the reasons, and I think actually they're reasons that we've discussed in our kind of dissection of what makes a Nolan film a Nolan film. And for me, this comes back to some of the themes that appear in Inception that we've discussed lots of times before. So one of them, I suppose, is probably a good time to get into that discussion of what the Nolan stuff. The themes of, so first of all, the flawed characters, having a flawed hero. And I think I quite like that about this. This is, this is our hero, or our protagonist in this film, is played by Leonardo DiCaprio in what I would describe as one of his incredible movie star roles. There was a point in DiCaprio's career where, for a long time, as a young man, even as a child, he was like an actor, where he would take on these interesting characters. And then Titanic happened, and this isn't actually a criticism of Titanic at all, really, but he then became a movie star, someone who holds your attention on screen, who is a matinee idol, is probably an old phrase for it. But in this film, he's definitely a movie star more than a character, you know. But he's compelling, and he's handsome, and he's just very easy to watch in this film. But he is flawed, you know. He's not like he's not necessarily very likable. The crime of which he's committed is that of murdering his wife, you know. So there is this sort of suspicion surrounding him, and dubious nature about his morality and involving people. He lies to his team about the what's at stake in terms of if the mission goes wrong, and he doesn't tell them about the fact that his dreams are always haunted by his deceased wife, who played brilliantly by Marion Cotillard, who sort of travels around his dreams trying to essentially kill him so that they can be together. And we find out through this that actually he deceived her at some point in their past, which ultimately led to her death. Which, so he is morally incredibly questionable.
Definitely, and you know, as I come back to this hotel and like these signature features or trends, there is the flawed male is very much a signifier of Nolan's work, isn't it? And what I like about Cobb, or what's interesting about Cobb, is that he does have like some heroic qualities, but he is, as you said, very flawed and very vulnerable as well. And it's interesting. It's not just his wife, is it Malu's a problem that he's hiding, is that when they go into the first dream state in like the final sort of third act, it's he brings the train into the dream, doesn't it, which causes the conflict. So he's also a very unreliable narrator as well, and I'm sure we'll talk about the end. That's towards the end of our video, but you know, his unreliability as a narrator is really interesting. But I feel he contrasts quite sharply with the other male characters in the film, who I feel are quite like stereotypical, and again, they're just there to fill a need in the narrative. But I said that's what makes him so interesting for me. But again, I feel that with Cobb as well, all his actions make him unreliable. It's not necessarily not natural decisions for the character, but they just seem on the surface to be in service to the narrative and to get us from one point to the next.
See, that's where I think his unreliability and his being flawed and vulnerable, for me, this is where what makes it so interesting as a movie kicks in, because rather than it just being there to propel the narrative or being driven entirely by an idea, I think this is where a lot of analysis of the movie has centered so much on the idea that this is a film about dreams, because that's that's the common idea. I think that the whole dreams thing is a MacGuffin. I don't think this is a film about dreams. I think it's a film much like his other movies, particularly The Prestige and even the Dark Knight trilogy. And it's a film about obsession. Okay, Cobb is as obsessed as Leonard is about finding his wife and that lost love. And I think that's a really interesting aspect of it. And in fact, the dreams within dreams, again, it's another plot device, but it's also a MacGuffin, because every layer he goes down the dream, I think, is just another layer of obsession that he's spiraling downwards into madness. And so this is a film that it entirely fits with the other ones, because these are characters who are obsessed, who don't and lack such self-awareness. They know they're obsessed with something. They dress it up, you know. Bruce Wayne dresses it up as having to do the right thing for the city, doesn't he? Leonard thinks he's trying to get revenge for someone who's escaping revenge. These people aren't. They are obsessed with something that they're never going to get hold of. And for Cobb, it's getting back to his children. And of course, you know, we never know whether or not he really achieves that by the end. So I think that theme of obsession is so brilliantly done in a kind of cold way in this film, where everything else is and sterile and looks perfectly constructed. The heart of it is a character who is psychologically a mess, despite it being, you know, Hollywood perfect Leonardo DiCaprio in his amazing perfect suits. Everything in his head is scrambled, and I think that juxtaposition is brilliant in this film.
And although that's expressed like in the structure and of the film itself and the narrative, is that we never truly know whether we're dealing with, like, let's say, a healthy mind, a sound mind, or a mind that is actually perceiving the same reality as also those around them. And each dream, each level you go into, it becomes more and more disconnected from reality and more like in service to his obsession, doesn't it, really? And I like it when they go to limbo, like the what he's looking for is like absent, really, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's like just that's like the it's like Scotty and Vertigo, you know, it's just constantly going down and down and down and descending down more and more and being consumed by obsession. And I think, you know, talking about narrative, like this idea, what I like about the film, like coming back to like the dream state like of it, is that, you know, we never really know, do we, when a dream starts or ends? And I think the film starts exactly like that, doesn't it? And, you know, when we go in, we just don't know what we can believe or not.
And yet, despite that kind of confusion and mess inside Cobb's head and the fact that that's reflected outside, the structure of the film works perfectly. It's not, there's you know, like Memento, which is this huge risk about moving forwards with one half of the film and backwards with the other half. Structurally, I think the film's flawless. It works within its own logical system. You know, the ideas of dreams within dreams within dreams. It's all logically progresses, and I think that's signature Nolan, is to obviously the narrative devices that are complex and yet work within their own world is brilliant. And I know we a lot of emphasis is played on Nolan, the guy with the twists, but I love this about this movie.
Oh yeah, I think it's one of the most brilliantly crafted films he's made. It's like it's perfect in that sense. And you're right. I mean, it does follow its own logic, and it is. I think maybe it's like so impressive technically that like overwhelms another part of what cinema should be, which is purely on the emotional side. And I think that's something I've come to realize after looking at Nolan's work, is that some of his films are so impressive that it's almost overwhelming, or it draws you out of that experience of like escapism and giving yourself over to the film, because not that you're trying to connect ideas, but that it's just quite noticeable, really.
I agree, and maybe that's why we ended up ranking Dark Knight Rises over Dark Knight, which is, we described Dark Knight as practically perfect, and flawless in that way, and yet the Dark Knight Rises possibly has that kind of greater pull from a sort of an emotive and old-fashioned sort of cheering type movie that does that. But I take this on with Inception. I do understand why it might leave some people cold, and that how you do lose that, and even you don't even get the kind of resolution that you want because it leaves you in doubt. I mean, it's quite this is again more spoilers for other movies, but maybe this is the Hitchcock fan in me, and particularly the Psycho fan, the fact that he incredibly cruel to his audience, really, because we want Cobb to be reunited with his children. You alluded to earlier the final scene. The final shot of the movie is Cobb finally seeing his children but we see through his eyes. We've seen flashbacks of his kids throughout the whole film, but only their backs. We've not seen their faces. For the first time, they turn around. We see their faces. Meanwhile, I don't know how to set this up. Meanwhile, there is a sort of an indicator that possibly Cobb is still dreaming, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, so if you haven't seen the film, all the characters, they need to have some sort of device or method to know whether they're in a dream state or in reality. And he has a totem, doesn't he? It's a spinning totem, and in his dream states, the totem spins and never ever stops spinning.
Yes, sorry. It's a little plot device that the film creates as a way of helping us understand the world of Inception and Extraction, because they never explain the technology. I love that they don't do that. It's on Wikipedia. Apparently, it's some sort of post-military, but that's never referred to. I don't think that they do this, and you don't know if they're in the future or a present. You don't know whether it's possible. In fact, the whole thing could be a dream. But
I think that's the strength of Nolan, actually, and critical of his writing in a certain extent, but he doesn't treat his audience like idiots.
No,
and you're right. I mean, he understands. It's like you don't need the information. We see it working, and it seems to make sense, so it doesn't matter. But I think again, this comes back to like this dream logic of cinema. Really, is that we have like an inherent understanding, I think, of how dreams work, don't we? And as long as it's like the narrative is constructed in a way that makes sense, we just believe it and go with it. So it's fine.
And one of these little plot points that he does give us as a sort of way of understanding this world is that for the characters to discern whether they're dreaming or not, they need to have what he calls a totem, a small object or device of their own, which they know the weight and the feel of, so that they can know whether they're dreaming or not. And for Cobb, he has what we would call a spinning top. I believe they're called a dreidel in America. And so he knows if he spins that, if it falls, then he knows that he's in the real world. And the agonizing last shot of this film is the spinning top lingering for what is much longer than we feel is possible. Just FYI, this is a slinky. Can you see my slinky? Yeah, metal slinky. I've had this for many years now. This is my totem. I keep hold of this, and I know exactly how it feels and its weight. And but this is how I know whether I'm asleep or awake.
You know what? Just before we started recording this, I thought I know you bet you're going to ask me what my totem would be. So I'll have a think actually, and that's difficult.
This is part of the power of the film, and I mentioned earlier the connection I had with the film. I think this film disturbed me quite a lot, and again, maybe this is a terrible thing to say. Like my connection with this movie is that it got inside my head, this film, to the extent that one time when I did watch it, that the thought of would you know if you were asleep or awake genuinely terrified me, and it's and that descent into kind of madness, that what if you didn't wake up. And I think I'm not one for horror films, and I'm not even one for psychological horrors, but that concept I found really disturbing. I think
this is what drives Mal.
Yes,
take her own life, essentially, is because she can never ever understand whether it's real or not.
And she doesn't. And of course, and neither does Cobb, really, because this dead woman is in his dreams, pursuing him with that. So I think that the totems helped me through that. But I think that idea of getting inside your head as an audience and accepting that idea was genuinely terrifying. I've made peace with it now, but yeah, I think that's my connection with the film is that that was freaky.
Yeah.
There are other Nolan elements to this, and of course, one thing we always talk about, and you've kind of, I think, I've sort of cut you off there, but you mentioned about how the dreamlike world of cinema, and of course, one thing we always discuss here is how is this a film about cinema itself? Nolan seems to manage to do that every time.
Yeah.
Did you see this at all? Have you felt that this is a film about filmmaking?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think. Well, if you look like psychoanalysis, which is sort of underpins most, theories and sort of analysis of film since like the 1950s, the general understanding is that we as an audience, we interpret dreams in a similar fashion to how we interpret cinema. If you think, and the sort of academic approach to this is called oniric, and it's where it's an approach to the study of film that argues that the depiction of dreams and the dreamlike state of cinema sort of overlap, and there's a lot of a lot of crossover there. Yeah. So film is an illusion, isn't it? Now, when we go in to watch a film, we have to sort of suspend our disbelief, so we know it's an illusion. Then the prevalence of ellipses as well in like narrative and in dreams as well is quite similar, and we have a sort of non-linear like structure, and we have to sort of piece these random images together to make sense of it. So it is very dreamlike film. And yeah, so I think that's something that is in this film, and we can talk a bit more about, I guess, in Tenet as well.
Yeah.
Well, it's like what you said earlier. It's like the dream is a projection of unconscious desires, isn't it? And that's pretty much all of the levels, like literally are that like an unconscious projection, but it's also infested by Mal and the trains and these things that we can't control really and don't have power over. We're just basically passive spectators, aren't we?
As well, and also that as spectators, I think that we have Cobb as our surrogate in the film as well, because I think this is very much like The Prestige. This feels like a natural success, as much as Tenet is a successor to this. This is a successor to Prestige, despite how different it looks and feels. As a film about characters who want to be tricked, about characters, we mentioned how The Prestige begins by the audience, being told by Cutter, played by Michael Caine, that everyone wants to be fooled and tricked, and that's us as an audience, the cinema, to be fooled. Cobb, he's not an architect in the film, so he doesn't design the dream worlds. So he wants to be kind of fooled by that. He fools Mal, as we said. He tricks her as well. He, as you mentioned, is a kind of an unreliable narrator, but he does this thing which a lot of our flawed Nolan heroes do. He breaks the rules that he sets himself. He mentions don't touch anyone else's totem, but I think the totem he actually uses is Miles. It's Miles, its own. So there are lots of things that refer to him as the kind of audience, the surrogate audience member. He's lost and tricked, and so I think this is a film that you enter into it expecting to be tricked and to work things out, and that for me is about cinema itself.
Yeah, and another point on that, we talk about the ending of the film, is that the ending, I can't remember from viewing it, and I don't know if it's one of these, is it like the Mandela effect or whatever? Does the totem actually sort of wobble at the end, or is that just because there is a sound where it sounds? So I don't know if it's a sound. The sound changes, it's like wood, metal grain on wood changes ever so slightly. So I don't know if I'm projecting that onto the screen and my memory. So even me as a film spectator, even my memory and recollection of the film is unreliable, isn't it?
Spinning carries on spinning, and it doesn't. It sort of moves as you would expect it, but for too long. But then the sound effect continues. But even the sound effect doesn't give anything away. But it's the fact that the sound effect carries on when you've gone cut to black at the end of the movie. Yeah. That you'll hear it if you, like you said, Mandela effect. You'll hear it if you want to.
Yeah. Well, Roland Barthes, an old film, literature playwright scholar, he talked about when psychoanalysis was first emerging in the 20s and 30s. He talked about this, and he said basically when you go in to watch a film or you're watching cinema, it is entering like a dreamlike state. And he says coming out of that dark room and coming out of that, when you leave a film, it is like waking up from a dream and you feel a bit disorientated. So again, even like at the end of the film, it's like we're waking up, aren't we? And we're still not quite sure about what we've seen or whether we can trust what we've seen. And I think it is, as I said, it is a remarkable like script and a remarkable achievement. But again, for me, maybe it went a bit too far, or I don't know. Maybe it's like, we'll talk about this with Tenet, but maybe again it's that idea is so like horrific, as you said, that sticks in my mind, and it's underscored by this horrible thought and concept.
And the tone, I mean, you know, he does, there is an exciting tone to this. I think that there's a real, there's so much pace and action to this movie as well. But of course, one of the ways that he is able to create the tone of not necessarily horror, but uncertainty, and this actually features as part of the narrative as well, is the use of music and sounds. You know, one of the ways that they get people out of the dreamlike state is to play them Je ne regrette rien by Edith Piaf into the dreamer's ears. But the music in this film is phenomenal. And we talked probably at length about Hans Zimmer when we discussed Interstellar, which is probably one of his greatest achievements. But there's a piece of music in this film, Inception, called Time, which I think is not only Hans Zimmer's sort of greatest 4 minutes of music, but one of my favorite pieces of film score ever. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful piece of music, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, soundtrack. And I think the Dark Knight soundtrack is amazing, but it feels like this is where like the Nolan Zimmer sort of collaboration really like peaked, and where they really finally started to get each other. Because right, so I would definitely say since Inception, the soundtracks that Zimmer's worked on for Nolan have just been at a consistent level. That's just like, he's just untouchable, isn't he, when he works with Nolan?
Yeah, it's fantastic. So
something local, sort of local boy, Manchester's Johnny Marr, isn't it, who plays the guitar and co-wrote Time with him.
And you can find a live performance on YouTube. Maybe I'll link to that underneath.
Yeah,
it's great. So yeah, it's got ticks all those boxes. It's a movie about movies. It's, you know, it's flawed characters. It's got the Zimmer score. It's got the twisted narrative.
I also like on this list of like Nolan features, but also, you know, films about films, like how fluid it is with the genres. You talked about earlier, like there's a lot of horror elements, but we go from like, you know, I would say it starts like a spy thriller, almost like a sort of strange Bond film, and then we have like film noir elements, and it ends up as a heist and a grift. And yeah, it's the fluidity with which you can just cross genres and combine them is one of the things that makes the film so entertaining and unpredictable and enjoyable, I think, for many people.
Is this I mean, I came out of the movie thinking, oh crikey, that's just the most incredibly intelligent Bond film I've ever seen. And whereas the Bourne movies really shook up the world of Bond as to how complicated or how fast-paced they should be, and how the action sequences. Casino Royale is really Bourne, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
James Bourne, isn't it? But but they've never looked at Inception and gone, oh, we could make the Bond films a bit more complex in their ideas, which you think, well, that would be a great direction for.
I think they learned the mistake with Moonraker, didn't they? That they can't even dip a toe into the sci-fi world with Bond.
Yeah. And you know, and for the same reasons, I really don't want Nolan to direct a Bond film. I don't think, you know, it would be too limiting for him. And I know constraint can be good, but I do like his sort of bigger ideas.
Well, I think it's too late, isn't it? When we have Tenet, he's always done it basically.
I think that's it. Yeah. So it's you know, it's I think it stood the test of time. I think it'll always look impressive because he, again, as we've discussed before, he uses real effects to create, you know, there's very little CGI in this, and what there is kind of just it's there to serve the story, is, you know, in many ways. It's got some, you know, beautiful locations as well. A lot of it's set in Paris, which looks great. And you know, and maybe that the sort of shallowness that, in a way, maybe will give it the kind of might be kind to it overall, that it kind of will feel like a Hollywood blockbuster for a long time to come.
I think like the shallowness and the coldness of it, and maybe another way to just to quickly consider is, you know, it's interesting. I think Nolan, because a lot of his films, his modern films in particular, are like set within, or there's connections like the high corporate world, like CEOs, and everyone's very sharply dressed, and it all takes place in hotel rooms and, you know, fancy things like that. So what do you think, I mean, about that? Do you think Nolan is that like design ethos he has, and that like approach to aesthetic? Do you think he's like is he making a comment that's criticizing capitalism, or what do you think he's saying about that? Because I've seen articles online where argue different things, where some people arguing that he sort of, fetishizes the corporate world, and other people saying actually it's reflecting the cold lack of humanity in it.
Do you know, it's interesting because I think we've sort of hinted at or mentioned that he rarely makes big current political statements. Interstellar and climate change is probably close as you get to him taking a modern day issue and saying something about it. And I think it's I don't think he is worried about whether that's a safe option or not. I think he's just obsessed with making movies and telling stories, and he doesn't have necessarily an agenda. Like, the same way that his great inspiration, Steven Spielberg, never really, with the exception of Schindler's List, Spielberg's not a political filmmaker, really. Yeah. He's of his era. Yeah. Interestingly, with Inception, I think it's a great question about, is this a critique on the corporate world, or even there was something happened when I watched this last year when we were rewatching them that might actually prove to be a kind of modern idea about how technology comes to inhabit us. If Inception were possible and technology can be the root of causing ideas, when I sat down to watch this, I put it on Netflix, I think. And then my phone beeped or had a notification as I sat down to watch this. Yeah. And it was my phone, and it said it was Siri suggesting apps, notes. It suggested my notepad, and it suggested specifically my notes called Nolan, which I'd been keeping all the notes on the films on.
Wow.
So this was me sitting down of an evening, and I'm, either that's a mad coincidence, or it's watching me, or it knows because my Netflix is on my phone as well as on my telly. Yeah. So it realised I was watching a Nolan film. I'd called one of my notes Nolan that I return to every time I watch a Nolan film on Amazon Prime or Netflix, and it just put two and two together. But that felt like Inception just before I was watching Inception.
I think that would freak me out. I think I'd have to go for a walk or something. I definitely wouldn't be watching Inception. I'd have to turn her off.
It was so strange. So all of a sudden, from considering Nolan as a filmmaker who doesn't get particularly making films about the now or the zeitgeist, to having a technological device that was trying to give me the idea of why not use this app? I thought, wow, no, he's nailed it here.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I agree. I don't think Nolan makes films with. I think he makes films for himself primarily, and he wants to get his ideas out. And you're right, and I don't think he's consciously saying anything necessarily about like the corporate world. But it comes back to what I said at the start of the video, like that design and that look of certain films like that, like the so cold and clinical. I just wonder if that is purely just his preference, like visually, or if what's going on. I don't know. It's because that's one of the things in his work that I think is one of the key things why some of his work is quite cold for me, is that design element of it.
It's strange because the mise en scène is always pretty flawless, whatever his movie. But in a way, the coldness and the corporate world that he creates, and like I said, the sterility of this film feels more authentic than perhaps when he tries to do grungy, gritty.
Yeah.
I always think that the parts of Gotham that he creates that feel sterile were much more believable than, what do they call them? The sort of
the Narrows.
The Narrows, that's it. It gives it. I mean, it's a great name for them, isn't it? But the Narrows in Batman Begins feels a little bit like a film set. But
exactly. Yeah, I agree. It's almost like walk one toe into like the Dick Tracy comic book design. It feels very German expressionistic as well.
Right.
But no, that's what I mean. When I love Batman Begins, but you're right. The Narrows, it feels very designed.
Yeah, and yet, but the stuff in Dark Knight Rises feels shot completely on location. Like that, you feel like that is the Gotham, the Wall Street part. I know it was filmed on Wall Street, but that feels convincing to me. The business world. And likewise, as much as I love The Prestige, and I wrestled with that being on one, there's a very designed feel to the alleyways. It's you feel like these are Hollywood actors dressed up for a Dickensian romp.
Oh yeah, and it's not just the Jackman connection, but it really does feel like they shot it on the same set as Greatest Showman. They just turned the lights down, like the outside of Barnum's Theatre. It's very, very similar. So I know what you mean.
Oh yeah, no, a fetishization of that world, I don't know. Is it a critique? Probably not that either. But at the same time, I think it's about. It's movie making. I mean, you could definitely accuse his films of being like almost incredibly middle class, and when
I was gonna say that actually, is this just a reflection of like the level of society that he's been brought up and raised in? But that's what he's used to, and that's what he sees.
Kind of. I mean, Nolan himself,
The way he dresses on set.
yeah, he is sort of dresses very sort of dapper, and he's very well spoken, isn't he? And so his world. I mean, that's the same thing as the Bond films themselves, isn't it? They kind of inhabit this sort of world that people would describe as escapist, and I think it would be incredibly insulting for a filmmaker like Nolan to try and do a Ken Loach-esque social realist film.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so I think his argument would be he makes films about escape, for escapism purposes, even if in this film you can't escape your own brain.
Yeah. It could just be a simple like design thing that he wants to contrast the different levels as much as he can. So.
Yes, and that's
like you need to have like a design ethos for each level, don't you? So when you're cutting between them, you don't have to explain it.
That's right, and that's visually why the film works so well at the same time, doesn't it? It's a great visual masterpiece for that reason.
Yeah. Just before we finish, actually, it's fair to sort of defend Nolan a little bit and address like these criticisms people have that he can't direct action scenes.
Oh yeah,
we've heard people say that to us like in person. We've seen it online, and my only understanding of this comes from there was a video about 10 years ago that's mentioned that in The Dark Knight Rises, there's one shot of Aaron Eckhart's Two-Face in the van, or Harvey Dent, that it breaks the 180 rule or whatever. But apart from that, I just don't see this criticism. Like as I said at the start, it may be the film that is for me leaves me feeling a bit cold, but in terms of entertaining and like action, it's absolutely flawless. Like the third act. Yeah,
definitely. It's so exciting. There's the chase scenes, the shootouts, the kind of there's interrogation sequences. This was proof that Nolan could do action, and it came after The Dark Knight, so it meant that after a phenomenally successful movie, so he could do action, and this was him saying, well, I can do scale as well, and it was building blocks for Dark Knight Rises and stuff like that. So, and do you know what, it starts, you'd say maybe sci-fi. It starts off. I think it is a heist movie. It only occurred to me the other day, really, that it's sort of heist movies when we were talking about it. But it does cross genres, and if this is one of the films that we will use for to suggest that he is the next Spielberg, I think that will kind of fit into those building blocks, into that case, the evidence for that case, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, good. Right, brilliant. Okay, well, like I said, I love this movie, and I will go back to it time and time again. And it fits neatly into all of those things. But we've got one more film left of the original 10, the first 10, before we do our long-awaited Tenet review, and that's of course his most recent film before Tenet, Dunkirk, which you'll do the synopsis for this time.
Yep.
Interestingly,
it's about the beach.
Yes, that's it. I think it's his shortest movie, isn't it? I think, other than Following. But I shall really look forward to that, because it's made me, after all this time, want to rewatch some of them all over again.
I'm going to watch them this week, I think. I think I've just if I had to have a totem on me. It's not on my set of keys which is sitting in front of me, but for years and years and years on my set of keys, I've had a key ring that just randomly, I think when we had our first baby, me and my partner went to see one of my partner's friends, and we were just talking about it. And she was like, oh, I love The Simpsons. And then a couple of days later in the post, I just got a key ring of Chief Wiggum.
Oh, wow.
It's now in our house on the back door keys, but thinking actually, I've had that in my hand so much and sort of unconsciously just both playing it with my hands. I think that would be it.
Yeah, definitely. You have to find the thing. I mean, the fear of losing this thing is terrifying. It was a real, like I said, a sort of an overlap where you bring a bit of the film into your own world, as it were. And I think that fact that I could do that stuck with me for a long time.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, thank you for that, Matt. This has all been, I guess, in association with Matt's film blog and our old South Sefton Scribbles stuff. And we will bring out the last two of these videos much, much sooner. But it's been nearly a year since Tenet's release at the cinema, so it will be great to coincide that with an anniversary.
Yeah, I'll watch it again, actually, before we do it.
Ace. All right. Thanks very much. And
don't forget to share, like, subscribe and all that.
Yeah, and comment. Tell us why we're wrong.
People do that, don't they?
Yeah, all the stuff below. Great. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thanks.